بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Is the microphone working well?
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me? Yesterday we talked about superfluous speech and talking about what does not concern us. We talked about contentiousness, yura. And we'll continue that a little bit today. The point of all of this in emphasizing the negative aspects of speech is not just to avoid those, but it is to cultivate in ourselves dignified and beautiful speech. That's the goal. So we want to develop al-kalim al-tayyib, the good word. And the Quran says in Al-Baqarah, verse 83, worship none but God, be virtuous toward parents, kinsfolk, orphans, and the poor, speak to people in a goodly way. So this is what we seek, is to be able to speak to people in a goodly way. And then it says, and perform the prayer and give the alms. This command to speak to people in a goodly way also includes to call them to the oneness of God, to teach them the true teaching. And it refers to all people without exception. So there is no one that we should not speak to in a goodly way. Muslim transmits that the Prophet ﷺ said, Al-kalimatu tayyibatu sadaqah. The good word is charity. Bukhari and Muslim both transmit that the Prophet said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, ittaqu an-nara walau bi shiqqi tamra. فإن لم تجدوا فبكلمة طيبة. Excuse me. Guard yourselves from the fire, even if with a tiny piece of date, which you give in sadaqah, in charity. If you do not find that, then with a goodly word. Again, to repeat what we said yesterday, of all the goodly words that we say, one of the most important of them is to try to show agreement with other people as much as you can. Even when they're wrong, if the wrong that they are talking about is not a serious offense. Contentiousness is when everything's got to be corrected. We challenge people on everything. Okay, so may God enable us to be like that. We want to be agreeable people. And of course, when things are really important issues that pertain to the religion or to important worldly concerns, then we have to express what we know to be true. But even then, we have to do it with a goodly word. We have to do it in a way that is wise and good. Imam al-Ghazali says the goodly word, al-kalimatul tayyibah, is the remedy for all blameworthy speech, especially contentiousness, argumentativeness, and so forth. Again, when we show agreement, wherever possible, we're not compromising basic truths or major concerns. That's where we draw the exception. But so many things that we object to are not objectionable. Just let it go. And always avoid harmful and hurtful words. Beware of calling people liars, even if they are. Beware of calling people ignorant, even though they may be. But this is not, you don't want to label them like that. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about argumentativeness, which is jidal or jadal. Imam al-Ghazali notes that argumentativeness is more complex, because we have to sometimes argue to establish the truth. And certainly in our community today, some of the most valuable of all of our people are those men and women who are able to get on television or in the media and to effectively defend our faith. And often they're arguing with people. Okay, so that's really good. It's sometimes we have to argue sometimes. And we have to seek to have strong proofs. But argumentativeness is blameworthy whenever it pertains to argumentation in support of falsehood. And especially the biggest falsehood that we have in ourselves, which is defending the ego. Or in support of the truth, but with the intention of overcoming and defeating the opponent. Not with the intention of making the truth clear for the sake of the truth. So these are very important distinctions. Here again, as in the case of all undignified forms of speech, silence is the antidote. Silence is often the only way to safety. And again, if you keep silent, you can smile politely. Don't show that you're angry or that you dislike the person profoundly. And again, silence often is the only way that we can preserve our dignity. Pardon and forgiveness, as we said yesterday, open the doors of heaven. It's really beautiful when we can pardon people who have wronged us and forgive them. In the Surah Zabin and Nahl 16:125, God says, "Call unto the way of thy Lord with wisdom and goodly exhortation." Or we could say beautiful exhortation. مَوْعِظَةٍ حَسَنَةٍ بِالْمَوْعِظَةِ الْحَسَنَةِ, and dispute with them in the most virtuous manner. So whenever we argue or dispute, this is the standard. Dispute in the most virtuous manner. Surely thy Lord is he who knows best those who stray from his way, and he knows best the rightly guided. It's very good to go back through the speeches and presentations of people like Malcolm X, because he was an extremely effective person in argumentation, establishing the case of his people and the truth. But he always did it beautifully, and he's always smiling. And although the people that he's arguing with were people that loathed him and that sought to trip him up in any way they could, that never affected him. So these are the kind of examples that we have also that we need to learn from and we want to follow. Commenting on this verse, call others to the religion on the basis of the revelation that came for that purpose. Use clear, firm, and truthful words. Clear, firm, and truthful words. Avoid obscure language. So we need to be clear, especially when we talk about the truth or we talk about the oneness of God. Seek conclusive proofs that produce certitude in the person who hears them. Goodly or beautiful exhortation means beautiful expression of the truth. sound arguments and conclusive proofs, meaningful reminders, beautiful parallels and metaphors. It also means that this has to be done in a spirit of sincerity and generosity. In other words, that we're talking not for our benefit, but for the benefit of the listener. That's a huge shift, to be speaking for the listener's benefit and not for your own. You're not trying to prove something about yourself or be triumphal. Use words that soften the hearts, gentle persuasion, reasonable directives. Always avoid hoarseness. Do not harass. Do not be rude. Do not offend. I think another thing too is that when we speak to people about the truth, you don't have to give it to them all at once. You know, this is often the way that we are. I'm going to tell you everything that you need to know. But in reality, you want to just begin and then go to another stage and another stage. And this is also part of the interest that we should take in the listener, because this shouldn't be the only opportunity that we have to speak. I'm very happy to speak to you again and again and again. The verse says, thy Lord, thank you, thy Lord knows best who is rightly guided. That means God knows which people are inherently good and need only little admonition. When you're talking to a person who is a good person, they don't have to be told that much. You don't have to tell them over and over again. He also knows those who are astray, and because of that, arguments were not effective. So, now one of the beautiful hadith of the Prophet that pertains to this issue of jidal is that he said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, ما أوتي قوم الجدل إلا ضلوا. ما أوتي قوم الجدل إلا ضلوا. No people is given to argumentativeness, but that they go astray. Again, this is that negative argumentativeness. The Prophet also said something very similar, but it's like the inverse. ما ضل قوم بعد هدى كانوا عليه إلا وؤوت الجدل. إلا وؤوت الجدل. No people has gone astray after having been on a path of right guidance, but that they are given over to argumentativeness. And if we look at some of the ideological groups in our own community, some of those groups are very argumentative. They want to argue with you about everything, whether you raise your hands in prayer, whether you use the sibha, you know, this thing or that thing. And that fact that they are argumentative means that they had guidance and they lost it. They had guidance and they lost it. And people who have guidance are not argumentative. They can argue effectively and beautifully. They can make beautiful exhortations, but they're not argumentative. Okay, now there's some other things, quite a few other things that Imam al-Ghazali talks about, but I want to skip ahead. And I want today to talk about something very, very important, which is, I think, the most important topic of all for us, and that is backbiting. So Imam al-Ghazali puts this towards the end, but I think that it's good for us because I don't know how the time is going to work out that we put it forward. So let's do that. We will do backbiting. And this is something that we have to really, really be careful about because very few people, very few believers are able to avoid that. We fall into it all the time. The great prohibition of backbiting is in Surah Al-Hujurat. And this is Surah 49, verse 12. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اجتنبوا كثيرا من الظن إن بعض الظن إثم ولا تجسسوا ولا يغتب بعضكم بعضا أيحب أحدكم أن يأكل لحم أخيه ميتا فكرهتموه واتقوا الله إن الله تواب رحيم. The private apartments, 49:12. You who believe, shun much conjecture. Indeed, some conjecture is sin. And do not spy upon one another. Nor backbite one another. Would any of you desire to eat the dead flesh of his brother? Is there anything more objectionable? It's abomination. But that's what backbiting is. So just as you see that's an abomination, then know that backbiting is the same abomination. We don't do the one, we wouldn't even think of it. And the other we do all the time. But in the eyes of God, they are the same. This is very, very important. And that's extremely powerful speech. You would abhor it and reverence God. Truly, God is relenting, merciful. This verse continues to address how community ties can be undone by bad blood, by bad feelings that we have towards each other, and by the misuse of our tongues. Because this destroys our community. And one of the most important things is to build community. The Prophet said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, إِيَّاكُمْ وَالظَّنِّ, beware of conjecture, for it is indeed the most misleading form of speech. And this is speech of you to you. When we're talking about other people in our hearts. We have to be really careful about that. Because often we backbite in our hearts. We make judgments about people just on the way they look, or the way they appear, or the way they dress, or where they come from, or whatever. And this is very, very harmful. Since spying, tajassus, is usually the desire to seek out the faults in people, it is closely tied to backbiting. Okay, so we want to learn more about people, not so that we can help them or benefit them, but so we can discover where they are wrong, where their faults are. Maybe we can dig up something in their past, which is very bad. So this is extremely close to backbiting. And therefore they're mentioned together. Now,
Dr. Umar, sorry, what did you say undoes communities? You said something undoes.
Okay, let's go back to that. So this verse continues to address how community ties, the ties between us that make us community, can be undone by bad blood. Bad blood means bad relations between us, ill feelings between us, and then also by the misuse of our tongues. Is that what you're asking about? Okay. So we want to conceal the faults of others. And this is something really important. And it's akin to what we said before. Be in agreement with people, even if they're wrong, as long as that is not harmful, as long as that is not detrimental. This is counterintuitive, isn't it? But this is magnanimity. This is being a big soul. And also, we want to conceal the faults of others as much as we can, unless there is some demanding reason that we've got to reveal them to be who we know them to be. Why is this? What are the major purposes of Islamic law? The maqasid al-sharia. There's 6. What are they? Thank you. Okay, so first of all, hifdhu ad-din. You protect sound religion, not just any religion, not fanatic religion, not rigid religion. Wherever you find rigidity, wherever you find intolerance, you will find something else. What is that? Hypocrisy. Wherever you find tashaddud and ta'annud, you will find hypocrisy. That's where it hides. Because who's going to question it? So we have to have deen that is wasat, that's in the middle, that's between the extremes. And we have to preserve what? And nafs. So you have to preserve the self. You have to be safe from danger, from sickness, from starvation, and so many other things. You know, one of our brothers, Amir al-Islam, was talking to 2 African-American young men who are the children of Muslims. And he says, why are you not going to school? Why are you not learning anything? And they said, you know, the gang territories we have to cross to go to school, it's just not worth it. Okay, so in the inner city of our country, the United States, your life may be constantly in danger. That means that the society is finished. Okay, we could maybe turn that off if you don't mind. Yeah, so, you know, this is very, very important. These 6 maqasid of the Sharia, if any of them is lost, the society will fall. And we have to say that today, none of them is preserved. So it means that it's just a matter of time. Societies do not fall in a day or a night. They take often decades, even sometimes more than that. But if you do not restore these goals and protect them, you will not last. Whether you're a Muslim society or a non-Muslim society makes no difference. You've got to preserve sound religion. You've got to preserve the self. You have to preserve the what? Aql, intellect. Cultivate it with education, the ability to think. We have to teach people today how to think. We have to teach them about first principles and other things like that. That's all intellect. This is also why Islamic law is against alcohol and drugs, because they harm the intellect. Okay? And then you have to preserve an nasl or an nasab, the family, you know, and that means progeny. And of course, we talked yesterday about one of the main problems of a lot of Western societies today. The people don't know anymore who their mothers and fathers are. That is a disaster. It's a disaster. But if that is the situation, we have to live with it in a very humane and merciful way. And we're able to repair it simply by the act of Islam. Any of those people who come into Islam, it's like now you have, Islam is your mother and your father. Okay, but the family. And an important part of the family is I know my father is my father. I know my mother is my mother. Okay, then we could say the economy, al-mal, property. That we mean by that we should have access to halal wealth. We should have access to land. We should have access to water. A man or woman who wants to work honestly should be able to make a living. Again, in our inner cities, that's virtually impossible. Very, very difficult. And in fact, in many parts of the United States today, that's also the case, even in rural America. It's either Walmarts or, you try to draw a pension from the army if you were a veteran. Nothing else is going on. Miserable. And then what is number 6? Honor. And that's really important. You cannot have a sound society without preservation of honor. And therefore, backbiting and its prohibition and these other related things, they are fundamentally connected to the preservation of honor. Because even though all of us have different pasts and we have different backgrounds, and if we go into our past, there may be things there that are not beautiful, that we wouldn't want anyone to know. But it is our obligation to conceal that also, so that we receive each other in the most honorable way. And even a person who is not honorable, we will try to make them honorable in our eyes and in the eyes of the society, unless they are a detriment and they have to be warned against. But often that's not the case. So we want to build people's honor. We want to restore people's honor. And this is really, really important. And the Prophet said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, O gathering, ya ma'shar, of those who submit with their tongues, but in whose hearts faith has not taken hold. Do not harm Muslims. Do not shame them. Do not pursue their faults. For whoever pursues the faults of his Muslim brother or sister, God will pursue his faults. If you are seeking to learn the dark story behind so-and-so, then your dark story will be revealed also. This is part of the justice of God. Yes, this is a hadith. Unfortunately, I didn't put the Arabic text here. Yeah, this is a mistake I made. I'm not going to guess at it, but maybe I can look at my notes and see if I can get you I'm sorry about that. And he whose faults are pursued by God, God will disgrace him even in his own home. Whoever, in another hadith, the Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whoever covers the faults of a Muslim in this world, God will cover his faults in this world and the next. So this is beautiful. Truly, God continues to help the servant as long as the servant continues to help his brother or his sister. These are very, very beautiful. And it's typical of these hadith that they talk about concealing faults or avoiding backbiting in the context of inter-Muslim relations between Muslims. Of course, this is where the problem happens most commonly. Okay, because this is all about our community. But it's important to note that the same prohibitions pertain to other people as long as we don't have a relationship with them which is one of war and enmity. And even then we should be dignified And this is one of the things that we see in Salah ad-Din Ayyubi, who is trained by Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani, is that he was so beautiful in everything he did. Even though the Crusaders would break their promises over and over again, he would always pardon them, and he treated them gracefully. And he becomes legendary because of that. So also in an Islamic society, the Jews, Christians, Hindus, and others who live under the governance of that society, they are protected by the same laws. So you can't backbite them either. You can't make jokes about them either. And in fact, in traditional Islamic law, you could not say to a Jew or a Christian, "Ya kafir," disbeliever, because that offends them. And they would take you to court if they wanted to. And the court would punish you because they are ahlul dhimma. They are to be protected. They are to be protected by our tongues and everything else. Of course, we don't have that situation today. Today we live in different types of societies, but the civil relationship that we have between ourselves as members of the same society and citizens of the same society, it has the same status. So also we cannot do that with our neighbors in these societies around us, whether they are Jews or Christians or whatever they may be. We have to also speak of them honorably. And we have to have an honorable relationship with them. So riba does not just pertain to Muslims, the prohibition of it. It also pertains to non-Muslims as well, in most cases. And again, there can be exceptions to this, in the case of like big political enemies or people that are working against us and so forth. I mean, here we have certain licenses, which we'll go into later, inshallah. Again, the verse in Surah Al-Hujurat is a very strong verse. And one of the things we want to say about it is that the person we backbite in this verse and whom we disdain and whom we may hate and therefore we backbite is still our brother. So the verse emphasizes that he is still your brother, whether you like it or not. Of course, the statement in the verse, would any of you desire to eat the dead flesh of his brother, you would abhor it. This is a very strong statement. The semantic structure of the verse in Arabic implies that if such an abominous thing were offered to any of us, no matter how much we hated the person involved, we would abhor it. It would be impossible for us to deny its loathfulness. Therefore, just as we would utterly abhor and reject this first thought, eating the flesh of the dead brother, and this scenario, then we must have the same feeling. We must implant the same feeling, the same loathfulness and abhorrence to the second possibility, which is that of backbiting our brother. Okay, this is the intention, that make these equal. Just as this first one is unmentionable, it is unthinkable because it is so ugly. This is the way backbiting's got to be for you too. Raise or lower backbiting in your eyesight so that they are equivalent. Understand that in the sight of God, according to the scales of balance and truth, in the next world, they are the same. The two scenarios are identical. Therefore, this is the verse again is calling upon us to do what we can call transferal. transfer that natural abhorrence you would have for the one thing to the other thing when you don't have that, especially when you don't like the person or they've harmed you or whatever the case may be. What is backbiting? We call it, of course, in Arabic, riba. And riba is always true. That's part of its definition. So often we will justify our backbiting because we say, but it's true. Yeah, that's the definition of riba. It's always true. And riba is when we mention something about our brother or our sister that is true, but which they would not like to be brought to people's attention and are unhappy to have it mentioned. It is the consensus of the Ummah that anyone who mentions about another person something they dislike or are embarrassed by is true, which is true, is guilty of backbiting. That's what backbiting is. Backbiting is haram, haram, haram. And backbiting is perversity, fisq. It's a very bad act. And many of us, many of our brothers and sisters do not take it seriously. This is very common. Backbiting pertains to the living and the dead. The living and the dead. So don't talk bad about Malcolm. And don't try to dig up things from his past which are not true. And one of the African American authors wrote a really ugly book about Malcolm. And he died right after that. Yes. He died right after it's like, no, you don't touch Malcolm.
That's right.
We will defend the honor of Malcolm.
That's right.
And he was honorable.
Yes, sir.
But we defend your honor and you defend my honor, even if I'm not honorable. Unless there's some reason that you have to say that, well, no, you have to be careful. Okay? This is really important because we are a society of honor. And this is what makes us so good. This is what makes us so great. So backbiting pertains to both the living and the dead. To people in your presence and people not in your presence. Riba indicates that you say this in their absence, behind their back. But that's not an essential part of the definition. That's just the custom. Sometimes backbiting is right there in front of the person, especially when it's an act of aggression. So all of that is backbiting. And again, riba pertains to all people, especially fellow citizens. And you go into a country like, after Lebanon, I'm going to go to Holland and then to Germany. And I cannot come into Germany or Holland without their granting me permission to do so. Isn't that right? This is what we call aman. They give me aman, that I'm protected in Holland. I'm protected in Germany. I'm protected by Dutch law or German law. Therefore, I must defend the Dutch people. I must defend the German people. I cannot speak ill of the Dutch people or the German people. If you have a visa, if you have a residence, then you cannot speak ill of those people and you have to help them. And these are fundamental parts of Islamic law. In traditional Islamic law, you have chapters of aman, that who can grant safe passage or safe residence to non-Muslims in the Islamic governance. And anyone can do it, even a child. You didn't even have to get a visa. Now, if it turns out that person is a dangerous person, then the ruler can overturn that aman that you gave them. But they have to they have to usher them back to the border safely and let them out of the country because you brought them in safely. So this is very important, that this idea, this parochial attitude of us against them, this is ideological Islam. This is not traditional Islam. This is the Islam of creating the other, who is the embodiment of evil, while we are supposed to be the embodiment of good. Let's be honest about ourselves. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala.
This utopia, for us at this age, it's like utopia. It's not never there.
Like utopia.
Yeah, well, most of the Islamic ideologies, by the way, are utopian in nature. And traditional Islam is never utopian. It always deals with the reality on the ground, and it seeks to reform it and to make it better. It lives in the real world, dealing with the real world. Backbiting, and we're going to also talk about slander. Now, the difference between backbiting and slander is that slander is false. Slander is false. Backbiting is true. Book 10. And defamation, which is namima. Pray for me. The Hajj is catching up. These are among the gravest. Okay, backbiting, slander, defamation. These are among the gravest, yet the most common offenses of the tongue. They destroy us utterly. They destroy our honor, and our honor is precious to us. And they destroy the honor of our brothers and sisters and rip our communities apart. If we look at things like Sunni Shia relations, for example, in this country, in most countries, the Sunnis and the Shia were able to live together with great compatibility. Yeah. Okay, and because they were that way also, the Shia tended, especially in public, never to do things that would offend the Sunnis. This is the way it was in Pakistan, this is the way it was in India, this is the way that it was in most countries. In Iraq, it was like this also. Even many people didn't know, are these Sunni, are these Shia? Now, I'm really not entitled to talk about Lebanon because I don't know enough about it. I'm just assuming that's the case. Maybe that's not, I don't know. You know much more about your past than I do. But again, you know, these relationships are destroyed by geopolitics. That's what it is. That's what happened in Pakistan too. Why they start blowing up the mosques of the Shia and other things like this. This is all geopolitics. And often the people behind it, you know, they have the most lowly of all motives. The creation of the Taliban, for example, was geopolitics. Even the people who created them didn't care anything about them, but they knew that they could use them for certain political ends. So, and then also always in this, there's going to be backbiting and slander and defamation and violent language that will then lead to violent actions. And in Pakistan and other countries, this is really sad. It's really sad. You just see a community that's been ripped in two. And now they can't talk to each other. They can't understand each other. This is not right, you know. And this is why also all of our neighbors, whether they're Christians, whether they're Jews, whether they're Shia, whatever they may be, we have to have an honorable relationship with them. Okay, so riba pertains to all people, especially if they are a citizen of the state you live in.
Dr. Umar?
Yes.
Just a question. When you talk like this in the West or in the States, and you give lectures or in Holland, because people have a different opinion of what the real Islam is. They think it's what they see on TV. We are shocked in being Muslims and living in the region for what you're telling us. I mean, it's a lot of things that are new to us. What's their reaction when you tell them what you just said? How do they react to what you say? Because the picture of Islam they see on TV is completely different than what you've done.
Well, the problem that we have in the West is the difficulty of communicating the message to people who have been sealed off from receiving it basically by these lies. So here, you know, the harm has been done over many, many years. And essentially the purpose of it is to make Islam unknown and to create an image of Islam which is completely false. So how do we turn the tables on that? This is something we have to be thinking about very carefully, but most people are amazed to learn that Islam is actually what it is. And again, there are a lot of things that we can do and we have to do. There's a book that was written a few years ago by Abigail Balbali and by Maria Mendocal and by Jennifer Dodds. These are three great women. And it's called The Arts of Intimacy. And it is about the city of Toledo in Spain and how the Christians, Jews, and Muslims live together in that city. And it's very, very realistic. And it's not romantic. It's not going to say, oh, they loved each other. They didn't love each other. But they lived with each other. They spoke well with each other. They competed with each other in art and in poetry. And this is a good example of the kind of society that we were able to create. So books like that are really important, you know, to show people the reality of what this religion was meant to be. Riba pertains also to cities. It pertains to lands and to ethnic groups. So, for example, my mother's family comes from western Kansas, which is flatter than a pancake, scientifically. They're proven to be flatter than a pancake. And I remember once coming back from a visit to Kansas, and I went to Jeddah, and this car passed us, and on their bumper was, "A trip to Kansas is like a trip to hell." And, you know, that's not funny for me, right? Like, I have family there. I love Kansas, and I love western Nebraska, you know, so, you know, that's backbiting or slander. It's one or the other. But be careful about the way we talk about lands. You know, some like this is beautiful. Some places are not so beautiful. But don't backbite the land. And certainly ethnic groups. And don't talk about how bad the city is. Even though if we're going to talk about the problems of the city, we have to be honest. But always do things in a way that gives us the essentials that we need and doesn't go too far beyond that. Backbiting even pertains to the weather. This is what Imam al-Ghazali tells us. So don't be talking about how hot it is, how cold it is, how wet it is, or how dry it is. Please be thankful. Be thankful that, inshallah, you're healthy and that you're well.
Is there a rukhsa in England?
No rukhsa in England. You can go to Spain.
That's what
So backbiting then is always true. It's always truthful. Slander, buhtan, is always false. And that's why those Jews who spoke evil of Mary and her conception of Jesus without marriage, without a father, what they said was buhtan, slander, because it's absolutely untrue. Slander is a greater sin than backbiting. And often backbiting becomes slander. So it goes from the truthful to the exaggeration. And backbiting naturally lends itself to slander. So slander is whenever we say something bad about our brother or sister that is false. And then we have, I got my words confused, defamation. And defamation, actually the word I had in mind here is ifk. And namima is spreading calumnies. Or, so if it includes backbiting and slander. And if is the basic stuff of journalism and much social media or anti-social media. If is wicked lying, malignant passing on of rumors and defamation. If is always passing it on. That's what it is. It's when you relate things that you heard about people. And it might be backbiting. And it might be slander. Okay? And this is, of course, what the social media does. You put something there, and boom, it's all over the world. And many of the people who spread it, they change it and make it more toxic than it was. Again, I mentioned an issue yesterday without clarifying what that issue was, and I think I won't do that. But, you know, I could name the brother who began the problem. And I met him actually in the United States when I was on a trip there recently. I went there to perform the marriage of my grandson. And, you know, and this brother, I've known him for some time. He's a good brother. But it's like he was avoiding me. And you would think that, like, it's like he's always hiding. He's going into the broom closet, and it's like he's just a janitor or something. And then at the end, you know, I met him at the door by chance. And I gave him salams. And, you know, he gave me salams, but there was no warmth there or anything. And again, he started a particular issue. But in my belief, he didn't intend that thing to be what it became. But social media blew it, you know, out of proportion. But he's the one who gets stuck with it. So we really have to learn how to work with social media, and maybe we can learn ways to try to correct it. Although some people say that by its nature, social media does not lend itself to that. Tale bearing or spreading calumnies. This is namima. And the calumny or the namima is a maliciously false statement or charge or imputation. Okay, and namima is like as low as it gets. Namima also does not necessarily have to be false, even though I said that. It can include backbiting. But it has the purpose of causing trouble, okay? And bringing about fitna. That's what it's all about. And also estrangement, what in Arabic we call wahsha, making it impossible for people to be comfortable with each other after that. That's really evil.
Yes, it is.
You know, we want to do everything we can do to make people happy with each other, to enable them to be in harmony with each other. Namima is absolutely haram and is extremely harmful in all of its forms. Okay, so Imam al-Ghazali, forgive me if there's repetition here. He says backbiting is that you mention something about your brother, we can put in the word sister, that would displease him if he heard it, whether it be a defect in his body or his lineage, his family, his ethnic background. He comes from a bad family. Okay, why do you say that? It may be in certain cases we have to say that, but that would be the exception. It wouldn't be the rule. His character, a deed he does, a word he says, his defective religious practice. He doesn't pray. He doesn't fast. His livelihood, the way he earns his living, his dress, his house, or his vehicle that he uses, like his car. Okay, so we don't talk about any of that stuff in any way that is detrimental to that person or demeaning to that person. Again, the only time when you can refer to some of these things, some of them we don't really care ever what kind of a car he drives, probably. But the only time when you can break this rule is when there is a darura, an absolute necessity, because that person is going to cause harm to somebody else who doesn't know about him. And then you've got to tell them enough to protect them. Or because that person is going to be entrusted with something that he or she is not suited for. Then, and even in this case, you don't say more than is necessary. He says you don't even say about a person that he's a thief, even though he is, unless you have to say that. If he's not going to rob you or bother you, then we will avoid saying this. Maybe that's an extreme example, but in any case, this is an example Imam al-Ghazali gives. And we don't say that he's not good to his parents, even though he's not good to his parents. We don't say that he drinks alcohol, even though he does drink alcohol. We don't say that he betrays his trust, even though he does betray his trust. We don't say that he's an oppressor, even though he is, or that he's a person who does not care about salat or zakat, even though he doesn't, unless it's absolutely necessary to say them. This is all about dignity. This is all about honor. And it's all about giving people a new chance to build their lives back and, to have standing in the community. We are people who want to give people an opportunity to be better than they have been. Backbiting is not just in word. Imam al-Ghazali says backbiting is forbidden because it brings the shortcomings of our brothers, and we can say sisters, to the attention of other people who didn't know them. You cause them to know this person now in a light that he or she dislikes. You demean them. Anything that has this effect constitutes backbiting. And again, not just explicit statements of the tongue. Now, one of the things that we hope to talk about is ta'reed. Ta'reed. Ta'reed is when you use roundabout expressions to say things so that people understand one thing and you mean another. One of the best examples of that that I know is about Napoleon. Napoleon Bonaparte. Where was he from? Corsica. He was an Italian. When he conquered Italy, he made a pompous speech. And in it he said, all Italians are villains. So one Italian noblewoman, she said, non tutti, ma buona parte. She said, not all, but many. But when she says many, buona parte, it means not all, but Bonaparte. You see, like you are a villain, but not all Italians are. That's ta'rid. It's really brilliant. It's really brilliant. And, so ta'rid is something we want to cultivate, because sometimes it enables us to avoid lying, and yet, direct people in the direction we want them to go. But in backbiting, ta'rid is not acceptable. Even roundabout statements in backbiting are backbiting. Ta'rid is excellent to avoid lying. You see, but it's not good in anything that pertains to backbiting. So we have tasrih, explicit statements, and we have ta'rid, and all of these are backbiting if they have that effect. Deeds are like words. So we have to be very careful in imitating movements. The way the person walks, the way the person sits, speech habits, stutters. We have to be careful about cartoons. And again, cartoons are a legitimate form of attack, on certain types of people, like political oppressors and things like that. They're not forbidden, but, not cartoons about our brothers and sisters. We have to be careful about comical and hateful movements. Beloved Aisha, God bless her, once a very short woman came in to visit her and the other women with her and the Prophet, and she went like this. She raised her thumb. In other words, like, this girl is so short, she's like my thumb compared to my little fingers. You see, and the Prophet told her, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that was backbiting. You see, and of course she does tawbah from it. It's funny, and but she just raised her thumb like that, and of course they laugh. But that's also backbiting. In fact, imitating the defects of others is often the most powerful type of backbiting, because it creates the powerful image, an image that sticks. When we look at our blessed Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he rarely corrected people directly, right? And when people did things that were wrong or disliked, then he would often say, "Ma balu qawmin yaf'aluna kaza wa kaza." What is the matter with people that do such and such and such and such? Okay, so this is again protecting the honor of the person who did such and such and such and such. It is also backbiting. God save us. Backbiting is really difficult. It's really, really difficult. It's backbiting to listen to backbiting. It is even worse to say things that encourage people to go further. Like, subhanallah, I didn't know that. Or, that's amazing. I never heard that. I never expected that to be the case. And once you say that, it's like, give me more.
Excuse me?
Yes.
There is istighfar from backbiting.
We're going to get to that. I need that more than anybody. It's one of my most common du'as in the Hajj was, God forgive me and bless everyone I've backbitten. Yeah. Backbiting is worse than adultery. Backbiting is worse than adultery. The Prophet said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, إِيَّاكُمْ وَالْغِيبَةِ فَإِنَّ الْغِيبَةَ أَشَدُّ مِنَ الزِّنَا فإن الرجل قد يزني ويتوب فيتوب الله سبحانه عليه وإن صاحب الغيبة لا يغفر له حتى يغفر له صاحبه. So the Messenger of God said, beware of backbiting, for backbiting is more severe than adultery. We could also put in English fornication. A man may commit, or a person may commit adultery or fornication, and then turn back to God in repentance. And God, exalted be He, may turn back to him by accepting his repentance. But the person who commits backbiting will not be forgiven until the one he has backbitten forgives him. In his commentary on the Ihya al-Murtada al-Zabidi, he says, وَهَيْهَاتَ أَنْ يَغْفِرَ لَهُ, and it is extremely unlikely that he will forgive him. He tells the story then, as Zabidi, of an upright man who backbit a famous person in the city that he lived in. He regretted that he had done that. And so he sent someone to that person to ask the person to forgive him. And the man said, in my entire sahifa, in my entire scroll of deeds, I don't have a single good deed better than the fact that you backbit me. So how can I possibly erase it? Okay, and don't expect them to forgive you. And most of this will not become clear in this world. It will be clear in the next world, where we are all paupers and where we are all in need of every good deed we can give. Imam al-Ghazali reports an athar from Moses alayhi salam, من مات تائبا من الغيبة فهو آخر من يدخل الجنة ومن مات مصرا عليها فهو أول من يدخل النار. By the way, a really great study, and some people have done this, is to go through all of our sources and to gather together and to study carefully the reports attributed to Jesus and to John the Baptist and to Moses and to David and to others. This is a treasury, and it's really worth studying. It's really worth studying. But he said that Moses said, whoever dies repenting from backbiting will be the last person to enter the garden. And whoever dies persisting in backbiting will be the first to enter the fire. And why is that? Because of that other person. Because until they forgive you, or until you pay them back through your good deeds, and when you have no good deeds, what do you do then? You take their bad deeds. So until you do that, there's no forgiveness. This is also why fasting is such an important act of worship, because fasting belongs to God and not to you. And therefore your fasting will stay for you. And many of us, and many Muslims, many believers, they'll only go to the garden because of their fasting. Because everything else will be taken away. Why? Because of backbiting and also oppression and other things. So really, we want to wake up to this reality, and we want to discipline ourselves in this regard. Malik ibn Dinar, the great successor he relates that Jesus, again, we need to study these things and get them together. It's very valuable. And many people say, well, they're Israeliyat, that they come from the children of Israel. Well, so what? What children of Israel do they come from? Because among the children of Israel, you have the Judaic Christian, who is a Hebrew Christian who follows the law, and they had treasures of knowledge. And a lot of these beautiful reports, I believe, probably come from the Judaic Christians, the Ebionites, and from others. So they're really worthy of study. They're very worthy of study. And don't just discredit them like a lot of Muslims do today. And especially when we're talking about matters like this, assess the truth of what is being said. The Malik ibn Dinar, God be pleased with him, he relates that Jesus, alayhi salam, and his disciples passed one day by the carcass of a rotting dog. They said, how disgusting is the smell of this dead dog? And Jesus said, and how bright are its teeth? Imam al-Ghazali says that Jesus prohibited by this his disciples from even backbiting a dead dog. By this, he brought attention to the fact, telegram. By this, he brought their attention to the fact that nothing in God's creation should be mentioned except in terms of what is best about it, as long as you can do that. Ibn Abbas, may God be pleased with him and his father, Al-Abbas, he would say, إِذَا أَرَدْتَ أَن تَذْكُرَ عُيُوبَ صَاحِبِكَ فَاذْكُرْ عُيُوبَكَ أَنْتَ. Is that if you want to mention the faults of someone you know, then mention your own faults instead. That's healthy. I can backbite myself. Give myself an unhasanah. Okay, be careful about other people. And again, as we said, this all, to understand it, you have to understand that it all goes around the pivot of the preservation of honor. And honor, I think especially today, we have to emphasize the importance of honor, because a lot of things happening in our societies today make honor impossible to preserve. So a person committing an evil shall not be forgiven until the one he or she has backbitten have forgiven them, and that will probably not be until the day of judgment, when it is very unlikely that they will do that. And again, this is because of the fact that this whole thing is connected to the cultivation and the preservation of honor. This is what Imam al-Ghazali says. And the preservation of people's honor, of their good name, restoring their good name, their standing, their respect among us, is a major objective of the prophetic law. We often live in gross violation of that. We're ready to destroy people, as soon as we can. The least thing we hear about them. The strict prohibition of backbiting, slander, defamation, and spreading calumnies is fundamentally linked to this maqsid, the preservation of honor. Now, in Surah An-Nisa, the women, number 4, verse 148, God says God does not love that evil should be spoken of openly, save by one who has been wronged. God is hearing, knowing. So here is an exception that is drawn to the general rule. And that is that evil, even evil, should not be spoken of openly unless oppression has been done. Then we have the right to do that. Okay, so Imam al-Ghazali emphasizes you must try to defend the honor of the person backbitten as much as you can possibly do. If you cannot do this, speak against what is being said in your heart. Or change the topic. Or get up and leave. These are all difficult to do, and you don't have to tell me that you know it's difficult. I know it's difficult too. By definition, though, this is really important. By definition, although what they are saying is true, otherwise it wouldn't be backbiting. By definition, though, it is false because it is in violation of prophetic law and the principle of protecting honor. And therefore, here you have the right and often the duty to say that is a lie. That is not true. And it is true. But because it was spoken in a haram context of harming the honor of a person, you say, no, this is not true. This person is not that way. Okay, and you're coming to the defense of their honor. And we'll talk about that later when we talk about lying. Because there are times when you're allowed to say things that are not true, like in war, for example. But again, in the balance of prophetic law, the true statement spoken as backbiting is false. The law makes it false. That's really, really important. And, you know, I can think of an example, I hope it's permissible for me to say this, you know, of a certain sister, you know, that maybe when she was young, she wasn't very upright. Okay, she became upright later on. And then there's a particular man who came into the picture to blackmail her, not to backbite her, to blackmail her. That if you do not pay me so much money, I will expose you to your husband. And alhamdulillah, you know, we dealt with this situation. She dealt with this situation. She won. Nothing bad happened. But again, the main thing is that what he is saying is false. Period. I don't want to see any pictures. I don't want to hear anything because you did tawbah. And you are a good woman. Now, and for him to come as a blackmailer, the very fact that you did this as blackmail has transformed the whole reality. And the coal has become a diamond. So you've got to know that this is not true. And that was really important for her because she knew that she had not been good. Okay, and God bless her. She's a wonderful person, believe me. She is. Okay, but it's like we will shut the door in the face of the blackmailer. We will shut the door in the face of the backbiter, and we will preserve her honors. And we will not allow anything to bring about the defamation of her honor or anyone else. This is very, very important. So defend that person. And again, if you just say, hey, that's not true. What are you talking about? That can end the whole discourse, right? And maybe you can do it in a nice way, but you say, no, brother, that's not true. That's really not true. He's not like that. He doesn't snore. Even though he does. It's very interesting because in the Gambia, they will never wake up a snoring person. And they say, because if you do, you will snore. They have these beliefs like that. So the snoring person, they just leave him for go. So Muslim transmits that the Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, كل المسلم على المسلم حرام دمه وماله وعرضه. All aspects of a Muslim are inviolable, forbidden, with regard to another Muslim, his blood, his wealth, and his honor. And this pertains again to all non-Muslims who live with us civilly, who live with us in good civil relations. So their blood is protected, right? You don't have a right to kill them. And this is one of the great evils of the takfiris in our time, is that they declare everybody to be kafir, and then they declare everyone's blood to be free for the taking. Where did you get that? This is such a satanic teaching. And they're called the dogs of hell. That's what they are. They are the party of Satan. Okay, but we've got to be people who defend the honor of other people. So all aspects of a Muslim are inviolable with regard to another Muslim, his blood, his wealth, and his honor. All of these three are strictly off limits. Blood pertains to the preservation of self, nafs. Wealth pertains to the preservation of mal. And, of course, backbiting and so forth pertains to honor. Honor, and Imam al-Ghazali says, the self and wealth are concrete. And they are means of livelihood, means of life. I can't live without myself. I can't live without enough wealth to support my life. But honor is not quite like that, because it is an abstract quality. And it pertains to our conceptual image in the eyes of others, a surah al-ma'nawiyah, that is established in other people's eyes, as opposed to our physical image, our surah hissiyah. When our outward physical form, excuse me, and our inward conceptual form, our honor and standing are sound and well established, we hardly need anything more. You could probably part with your wealth. You could even maybe part with yourself. Can you part with your honor? And again, in traditional societies, people will die for their honor. And this is not, an indication of how unreasonable they were. It shows that they were men and women. And in my own country, if you offended a man's honor, he would challenge you to a duel to death. And this was typical. Like, you do not offend my honor. And now we will fight to the death, in defense of my honor. That became outlawed in the United States because it led to a lot of tragedies. In fact, some of the great early figures in American politics died in duels. And sometimes they were slandered in public just so that he would call the person to make a duel, because they knew that he probably would lose the duel. And therefore they justified killing him. That happened in certain cases. But the important thing is honor. And we've got to stand by that. I remember when I grew up in the South in the United States. And again, it was a white supremacist society. It was a segregational society. There was a lot there that was evil. But one of the things that I remember that affected me profoundly was honor. And I had a friend and a teacher. His name was Jim Smith. He was big. He was strong. He trained me in scouting. And he could take a big piece of wood, and with an axe, he could split it in one blow. And he went to West Point, which is a military academy of the American Army, and he had a scholarship to play football at West Point. And when he was in uniform, standing in attention, one of the cadet officers came up to him and began to talk about his mother. And he said, "Sir," he said, "you don't know my mother and you don't know anything about my mother. And this will be the last time you talk about my mother." And so that same cadet officer, sometime later, came up to him and said worse things about his mother, and he punched the man so hard he almost killed him. He just laid him out on the floor. And he was dismissed from West Point, and he came back to Athens, Georgia, University of Georgia, which is where I live. And for us, he was our hero, because this is the way we're supposed to be. We're supposed to defend our honor, and the honor of our mothers, and the honor of our sisters, and the honor of our daughters. Okay? Now, where has that gone in our society today? And these things are very, very important. So honor is an abstract quality. The conception people have of you in their hearts, and that's got to be beautiful. And we will not break that rule unless we have to. Unless we have to. So in this hadith, three things are mentioned: preservation of blood, wealth, and honor. And the hadith emphasizes that they are so essential that it does not draw an exception to them by saying, بِغَيْرِ الْحَقِّ أو إِلَّا بِالْحَقِّ, even though that is the reality. That the self can be taken by haqq, if he killed somebody, for example. And also, money could be taken bil-haqq, if he has to pay back a fine or something like that. But the hadith doesn't even mention that because it wants to emphasize the absolute importance of these three. You remember the hadith, which is sahih, in which it says, ذُكِرَتْ لَهُ بِرَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم إِمْرَأَةٌ وَكَثْرَةُ صَلَاتِهَا وَصَوْمِهَا وَلَكِنَّهَا تُؤْذِي جِيرَانَهَا بِلِسَانِهَا فَقَالَ هِيَ فِي النَّارِ. A certain woman was mentioned to the Prophet, and how much she prayed, and how much she fasted. What a saint! Except for the fact that she abuses her neighbors with her tongue. She backbites. And she does other things. She uses rude language. And the Prophet says she is in the fire. So again, backbiting is really serious. And again, even in religiosity, when we pray and fast, the spiritual path is necessary so that we're protected from ujub, from the vanity of self-importance. I'm better than them. I get up at night to pray. I'm better than them. I fast all the time. No, you're not. Not if you're a backbiter, not if you're a slanderer, not if you feel you are better than they are. You've got to be humble. If your worship is not increasing you in humbleness, then what good is it? Imam al-Ghazali tells us that the Salaf as-Salih, these great men and women in early Islam whom we love, and they were the greatest Sufis who ever were. The Prophet, and these are people of the heart. But he says the Salaf were all masters of the heart. That's just true. Read about them and you will find. They would say, أدركنا السلف وهم لا يرون العبادة في الصوم ولا في الصلاة ولكن في الكف عن أعراض الناس. So we met with the Salaf before us. These are also Salaf. And we found that they did not regard worship to be a matter of fasting and prayer. Although we have to fast and we have to pray. Rather, they regarded worship to be a matter of holding oneself back from speaking ill about the honor of other people. Okay, that's what we have to do. That's what we have to do. Imam al-Ghazali says, the companions would meet each other with beautiful faces and cheerful smiles, al-bishr, radiating from them, happiness from their hearts. And this is because they would not backbite each other. They would not speak ill of each other. They were trained to do that. And they regarded this to be the most excellent of all of their deeds. How could they live together in that incredible tabligh? Bringing them together like that. And again, because they are so careful about each other's honor. They regarded behavior contrary to this to be the sign of hypocrisy. So again, God, wake us up. We are very careless. I am very careless about the way I use my tongue. And, we want to wake up from that. Zabidi says that the contrary practice, of speaking ill of people is the characteristic of people matrudun min rahmatillah. This is the sign of being banished from the mercy of God. We are out of time, but let me just finish. I just have a few more things to say. Sayyidina Umar, may God be pleased with him, he would say, عليكم بذكر الله تعالى فإنه شفاء وإياكم وذكر الناس فإنه داء. What beautiful words, really. So he said, make a habit of God's remembrance, for it is a cure. Beware of mentioning the faults of other people, for it is a disease. One of the interesting things, is that certain people, I hate to say hypocrites, even some of the people I'm thinking of, I hate to think that they're hypocrites, but, I've known people that you could never point out a fault in them. They would be outraged. But they would see every fault in you and in everyone else. And this is what happens to the hypocrite. The hypocrite, he or she, becomes alerted to all the faults of other people, because those are their faults, which are so big, and they can't see them in themselves, so they see them in you. And that's why when they point them out to you, say thank you. I'll do what I can about that. Okay, because that fault may be in you, but in you it's little, in him it's big. But this is what happens. It's a curse. مَطْرُودُونَ مِنْ رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ. They see so clearly the faults of other people, and they don't see their own. This is a huge problem. This drives us crazy sometimes. Mawlana Zayn al-Abidin, may God be pleased with him, he said, إِيَّاكَ وَالْغِيبَةِ فَإِنَّهَا إِدَامُ كِلَابِ النَّاسِ. He said, beware of backbiting, for it is the preferred flavor or flavoring or condiment of human dogs, of the human dog. They love it. It's delicious. Al-Hasan al-Basri, he said that, Wallahi, لَلْغِيبَةُ أَسْرَعُ فِي دِينِ الرَّجُلِ الْمُؤْمِنِ مِنَ الْآكِلَةِ فِي الْجَسَدِ. By God, backbiting is quicker in destroying a believing person's religion than gangrene in the body. And in gangrene, you often have to just cut off the limb that has it. It will destroy the whole body. We're going to finish now. And I want to finish with a principle. And we'll come back to it later. Hard cases make for bad law. Hard cases make for bad law. Those of you who studied law, you know what that means. And I want to emphasize this because when you study law, this is true of Islamic law and all law, You want to focus on the easy cases, the clear cases that are not complex and that don't have exceptions. That's got to be your foundation. Okay, if you begin with the hard cases, you'll always be confused. So when we talk about these things like backbiting, we're going to see that there are exceptions. And you may find those exceptions complex and confusing. But again, hard cases make for bad law. Learn the principle and adopt the principle and live by the principle. And then when it comes to the exception, we'll work on that, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. But don't let the exception overthrow the rule. Don't let the exception overthrow the rule. So do not allow yourself to be confused by all the potential complexities that probably come to your mind. Grasp the principle, the simple principle, and hold to it. It is absolutely clear. It is simple. Exceptions will naturally be drawn, and they must be drawn. But do not let them confuse you about the validity of the principle. Okay, so this is very, very important, and we'll come back to that again. So we finished that lesson, alhamdulillah, and we're going to continue that lesson next time, because next time, we want to talk about backbiting of the heart. We want to talk about the cure and the forgiveness for backbiting, and we want to talk about why people do it, and then we want to talk about slander and tale bearing. اللهم وفقنا بما تحبه وترضاه وجعلنا من عبيدك السعداء وأمتنا على كلمة الهدى علمنا ما ينفعنا ووفقنا للعمل بما علمتنا به واجعل ما نحن فيه خالصا مخلصا لوجهك الكريم يا رب العالمين. اللهم اجعل تجمعنا هذا تجمعا مرحوما وتفرقنا بعده تفرقا معصوما لا شقيا منا ولا محروما. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. And thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see if I can find the